afternoon. How is everyone today? You good? Yeah?
We're great.
Come on.
Wow, sorry.
So this panel, we're really going to talk about the state of VC in Europe. And I think we're coming at it from three wonderful perspectives. One from a VC, one from a corp dev person, and one from a fund of funds manager. So what I'd love first is, would each of you please introduce yourself? So Nick.
Sure. Hi, I'm Nick. I'm an investor at Samsung Next. It's quite a new group for Samsung. We're maybe 4 or 5 years old. Samsung's DNA is hardware, but over the years it became clear we really needed to try to turn the company from a pure hardware company to one that does software and services as well. So there's a lot of good internal efforts around that, but our group's mandate is to look externally in, and the way we do that is primarily through investments and acquisitions. On the investment side, it's C to Series B. And on the M&A side, quite a few high-impact ones you might have heard of, including Viv, which was the AI assistant by the founders of Siri, or SmartThings, which is now Samsung's IoT consumer play. A majority of the group's in the Valley, but we have offices in New York City. I was based there for 2 years, in Tel Aviv, Korea, and as of last summer, we decided to open in Berlin to access the European ecosystem. So relatively new to Europe, but getting a lot of value from it so far.
And one last question is your team responsible for both investment and M&A, or are you separate people?
Well, we're separate people. We have different teams. We have the investors who are primarily focused on investments, and we have our M&A team. In Europe at the moment, we only have investment folks, so if we see M&A opportunities, we can be top of the funnel and bring it over to the M&A folk. But the idea behind having all these teams, and we also have a partnerships team actually, and the idea behind having these teams underneath one roof is that when we see a startup, an investment might not make the most sense, an acquisition might not make the most sense, maybe it's a partnership, but the idea is that we can empower the entrepreneur as best we can, depending on what makes sense. Yeah.
So James,
yes,
you came all the way from Houston,
that's right.
Texas. We had a good old chat about the day after Trump was elected.
Yeah.
And being in Texas.
Interesting time.
Very interesting times. So tell us a little bit about pros and what you're about.
Yeah, so I run our corp dev and finance group at Pros. For those of you guys who probably don't know Pros, we are a cloud software company, really helping companies powering their shift to modern commerce. So we have a lot of solutions that across many industries, across more than 40 industries. One of our big ones is actually airline. And one of the things that brought us here was we acquired a company called Viant Travel Technologies last year out of Sofia. And we were really excited with the company. What they do is they actually help really on the merchandising and shopping and pricing side of airlines. And with our technology, bringing more artificial intelligence to that and bringing more optimized prices to it. Is kind of how we saw that synergy. But after we did that, we then decided that we really liked Sofia in the Bulgaria area and decided really to double down and really start building out kind of our European headquarters here in Sofia.
Okay, so hold that thought, because I'm going to quiz you about that in a minute.
Okay.
But we're going to go to the EIF. Christo, tell us a bit about yourself. And you're based here in Sofia, is that correct?
Well, the European Investment Fund is a public institution, has offices, and I'm working in the Sofia office. We are, as a public fund of funds, investing annually in 150 VC funds across Europe, an amount of between 2 and 3 billion euro per year. And we are now in the last and this year in a sort of a more fundamental analysis of the state of venture capital industry in Europe, and even shifting our business model towards developing more of a growth and scale-up VC, something that I can say a few words about, that will also hopefully impact the Bulgarian venture capital ecosystem.
So I'm going to start with quizzing you, Christo, about EIF. And approximately how many funds in Europe do you put money into per year?
150, but...
150 around Europe.
Yeah, so there is actually quite healthy. I mean, we completed our State of Venture Capital Industry report for 2018 literally a few weeks ago. And this is a research including more than 300 venture VC fund managers in Europe. And at 86% of the fund managers, of the VCs in Europe, say that business is good or great right now. In Europe, we see quite a healthy growth, also rising valuations, more dynamics, At the same time, there are certainly a lot of challenges if you compare the state of VC business in Europe compared to US or Asia.
Yeah, I think like one of the, I spent a lot of time in London with the VC ecosystem there. And a lot of what we're saying is we're seeing that the state of venture in Europe is where venture was in the Valley in the late 90s. So we're a bit behind, but we actually see that there's a really big opportunity for growth and scale up. And I suppose, James, coming from Houston and deciding to make the place here in Sofia, can you tell me a bit about sort of what you're seeing in the venture community in the US versus here? Like, can you give us some comparisons?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's interesting. I'll admit I had not been to Sofia, prior to coming here last year. And I think if I had come, 10 years ago from what I've heard, I don't know if we would have been ready to invest as much here and to really build out the ecosystem. I think what I've seen with the companies here and talking to other folks is that there's a lot of great ideas here. There's a lot of good talent. And I think with having folks like you guys and bringing capital, I see no reason that this can't become a really great place for new ventures. And comparing it to Silicon Valley where it was in the 90s, I mean, that would be great to see that type of growth.
The numbers prove it. I don't have the exact numbers in my head, but I do have a slide on that. You
I
might
mean,
have some thoughts on that.
I mean, at one stage, one building in Silicon Valley would have more money under management than the entire Europe. But that's obviously changed quite a bit now. I mean, thanks to the EIF and people like that.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And then, Krista, with the kind of money that you're putting into funds, are you seeing, I'd love to explore a little bit regionally. And I know you're really focused on CEE, but are there certain regions where you're seeing a lot more venture, or are you deploying more capital into venture funds in certain parts of Europe? So how does CEE compare to Western Europe? And I will say, UK and London is, separate because it's such a big market. So where are you seeing that capital deployed right
New
now?
dynamics in Europe, and this is a bit different than well-established centers like Silicon Valley, is that we actually see a lot of emerging hubs for new enterprises and for startups all over Europe. Not only in Sofia, not only in Eastern Europe, but literally in all parts of Europe. So there is an increasing dynamics, and we can see this even in the amount of VC capital invested last year. It reached 17 billion euro of VC, and this is mostly early stage investments in various hubs across Europe. Of course, you have leading centers like London, Berlin, Paris, Stockholm, etc. But there are probably more than 24 of regional hubs like Sofia, where you see a lot of activity and a lot of venture capital investments.
But is it fair to say, like a lot of these emerging hubs, you're seeing much more early stage investment versus growth stage? Because I think, again, a stat that came across my desk was there may be 400 to 450, and don't quote me on that number, but it's somewhere in that scale of like proper chunky B rounds onwards. So we've got a way to go. And I know you being based in Berlin and having a pan-European focus, Nick, can you give us a little bit of insight about what do you see come across your desk? So how much do you get in terms of deal flow for a B stage round, and how competitive is it at the later stage?
I mean, just to actually go back on one question you asked earlier about the differences between the Valley and Europe. I think one macro trend we're seeing across both regions is actually the fallen number of seed deals. And the fallen number of deals overall. It's in Europe it shrunk quite a lot last year. This year it's shrinking as well.
For seed?
For everything.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, number of deals across the board. But what that's indicative of is a fallen seed deals, because those are usually the largest number of investments. But at the same time, you're seeing an uptick in amount of invested dollars. So what that's essentially saying is there's less money in the seed in early stage deals. Crypto is actually one thing which might be affecting that, which we can talk about later.
ICO.
Yeah.
That old word.
And then and sort of more money going to the A and B rounds. And there have been some B rounds this year which have been super competitive. I mean, what you're seeing now as well is that there's a lot of U.S. money coming into Europe. Last year there was a sharp uptick in amount of U.S. money. entering Europe, and a lot of the time they're coming in generally at the A or more commonly at the B rounds.
Can you give us an example of some deals that you've seen? Like any specific
I'll give you an example of a deal I did.
Sure.
So we invested in Unbabel earlier this year, which is a Series B machine translation as a service startup, and
where are they based?
They're based in Portugal, actually.
Yeah.
But that was led by Scale VP.
Yeah.
And
what was the size of that round?
I'm trying to think if that was public. Yeah, it was 20 million plus.
Okay.
Yeah, for a Series B, and we've seen a lot, especially in the B2B space. There's a lot of bigger deals now, and there's a lot of growth stage investors coming in from the States, and even someone like us in Europe, although we have a Berlin office, we have a big Berlin team. When we actually invest, it's counted as money from the States because our fund is actually based in the States. So even though you're getting investors from the States with a presence, an actual physical presence in Europe, that money is still counted as U.S. money.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then from an EIF perspective, Christo, I remember reading about this announcement about Venture EU. So everyone has to look at the hashtag Venture EU, and apparently it's a 2 billion fund of funds deployed to 6 fund of fund private managers across Europe. Can you explain a little bit about what it's about, what's the philosophy? Why are you outsourcing that to private fund managers, and what was sort of the decision behind that, and what are you going to gain out of this?
I mean, it relates to what we say in the more maturing venture capital ecosystem across various hubs in Europe. But at the same time, when you come to a really 100 million euro round, there is literally a few doors to knock in Europe, if any. So basically, the average venture capital fund size in Europe is like 56 million euro, and it's 3 times less than in the US, or if we compare with Asia, it's similar disadvantage. So basically, the venture capital fund players are too small to get into the bigger rounds and really support with funding real scale-ups in Europe. And one of the reasons for this is that there's no shortage of capital of Europe, but the really traditional institutional private capital is sitting on the sidelines. There is no proper vehicle to kind of channel pension funds or sovereign funds or really big institutional private money into VC funds that are now too small for those sort of investors. InvestEU, Europe VC is an initiative that basically should create 6 larger fund of funds across Europe. And for this initiative, we finally concluded successfully our discussions with some of the largest asset management groups across Europe. So the asset managers that will actually develop purely VC-focused fund of funds currently manage more than €500 billion. And this is really a new vehicle that should bridge large institutional private capital with venture capital industry. The goal is to, at the end of this initiative, so in a couple of years from now, to really generate a breed of new VC funds, let's say up to €1 billion size VC funds that can really get into the later stage rounds of investing and support the growth of VC in Europe.
Great.
Yeah.
So I'd love to switch tack a bit and talk about a little bit about trends, so technology trends that you're seeing. And James, why don't I start with you, because there's a reason that you came to Sofia, acquired the company here. So what are some of the trends that you're seeing? And then I'd like to switch to you, Nick, around what are the big waves that you're investing in, not just on behalf of Samsung, because I know you have your specific waves, but actually what are the waves that you're seeing around Europe? So James, can we start with you?
Yeah, so I think one of them is around commerce and how companies are actually going to market today. So at Pros, we actually have 2 different sides of the business. One is a B2B, one is B2C. B2C is more of the travel. B2B serves all of the other industries. And we're really focused on the commerce space. But companies are going through a big digital transformation right now. And they're struggling with how to do that, and especially in how they handle kind of their e-commerce business, because companies have traditionally gone, they've had their direct sales force, a channel, and they haven't really had a mature e-commerce business. We've seen it on the B2C side, we've seen Amazon has changed how everyone buys. You know, we had we had a speaker up here earlier talking about Alexa, but just the way we all as people buy products, we have it on the consumer side, but we haven't had it in our day-to-day life in businesses. But now those people are saying, hey, it's so easy, it's so frictionless how I can, go and buy, Tide bleach, Clorox bleach or whatever, just by speaking to a Alexa. Why can't I do that on the B2B side? And so we're seeing that trend move more to B2B, that people want that frictionless selling. They want to be able to go across all their channels, whether it's direct sales, whether it's e-commerce. But to do that, you need a lot of intelligence. You need artificial intelligence to drive that, because if you're not going to have that human-to-human interaction when you're going to an e-commerce site, you need to have, whether it's voice is a big piece of it, any other artificial intelligence that actually that's developing the right offer for people so they can have that frictionless buying experience. And I think it's changing the way businesses think about what their sales force is. I'm not saying this is, you've seen some headlines, the death of the salesperson. That's not happening. It's just changing how companies are going to market. And so
yeah, I think it would be much more a smartly equipped, value-added salesperson, and
right.
all the dumb tasks are taken care of, the machines and the artificial intelligence.
That's right.
And that's certainly what I'm seeing in the state of retail and e-commerce in the United Kingdom. What about you, from a Samsung perspective?
Sure.
Some of the big trends.
Yeah, and just even before I go into the Samsung perspective, just, because, a lot of the stuff we look at is generally trend-based as well. I mean, it follows the waves. And we have our own hypotheses around various verticals. The idea about B2B, that's interesting. There's a lot more B2B investments these days than B2C, and that ratio is just increasing. A lot of the big tech companies are starting to take away the opportunities in B2C. The one area which is, really hot in the B2C area is actually, the previous panel with Scott at Fair.com. This idea of access over ownership, you're starting to see across multiple verticals. It's not just music, it's not just video with Netflix or MoviePass, it's now with cars, maybe with electronics one day. It's definitely, like, some of the biggest funding rounds right now are going into mobility sharing. There was a new unicorn the other day with bird.com and things like that. So that's definitely, one very hot area. For us, we're looking at many different areas. One of the big themes we're looking at this year is the idea of decentralization. We see that coming back into fashion a lot.
Well,
and
what do you mean by decentralization?
So
are we getting into the blockchain
No,
here?
we're not necessarily. Decentralization to us just as in blockchain. It's also edge computing and things like that. It's the idea of having these resources closer. And so, but across that, there's many different technologies which enable that and fold into that, and it can be applied to a lot of the verticals we look at. We look a lot at IoT, with smart things, of course. It's a very interesting area for us. Industrial IoT is one which Europe has a particular advantage for, because a lot of industry in Europe and Germany and places like that, they're actually very willing to experiment at the moment, which is great to see. AR and VR is one area which I've always been very personally interested in. In the last year, AR investment overtook VR investment, and it makes sense. The total addressable market is much larger for AR right now, with mobile AR and ARKit and AR Core. One area in AR which is super hot is this idea of an AR cloud, which is this persistence multiplayer world where we both know exactly where we are in this room, and this room is mapped and we're localized precisely so that if you're looking at through your phone and I'm looking through my phone, we would see an AR object in exactly the same place. For example, a glass on this table. I mean, you saw there was a big round in London by GV, Blue Vision, 6D was funded by General Catalyst, and then there was another one by Index, as well as Google. So Google invested in 2 AR cloud companies recently. So that's a very interesting area. With AI, I think we're starting to see this year, more actual applications for AI, not just the enabling tech. And hopefully things which require less data and also have more explainability, so you have less of this black box. What else is there? Health. I think with health.
Digital health.
Digital health is huge. Yeah, I think
So the clues of the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Historically, it was very much about wellness, and I think people realize that you can't really make too much money from just wellness. I mean, wellness, yes, if you're talking about mindfulness and everything like that, but what you're seeing now is a lot of applications which treat chronic health and
yeah, and I'm also observing a trend. This is definitely coming from the Valley, which is around aging.
Sure.
And I think all of us in the room will be able to look at technologies and DNA, et cetera, and none of us will get old. And I'm quite frankly very happy about that. And you know, I'm seeing a lot of that coming from the Valley.
Sure.
Christo, from your perspective, EIF, are there regional strengths or regional trends and technologies around? So what is Sofia or what is Bulgaria best known for, technology-wise? What makes you world-class?
Or European-wise first, looking at our portfolio of more than 500 VCs, active VCs, investing in mostly early stage in Europe. Okay, the big focus obviously is ICT and life sciences, but we also see some sector more like clear segment, increasing focus on fintech, on cybersecurity, or what we generally call deep tech space, artificial intelligence technologies. So we see more concentration in those segments across Europe. In the region of Southeastern Europe, basically, there is growing activity not only in Sofia, but also in Romania, in Greece, in Western Balkans. Just this and next year, we expect with our initiatives and also other local initiatives, maybe between 12 and 15 new early stage VC funds to start operating just in the region of Southeastern Europe.
Definitely deep tech and AI. I'm seeing so many new funds popping in that space. So I'm getting the hook. We've got to get going. But I want to finish with one last question. So a very short, succinct answer from each of you. Advice for all the founders in the audience about where do you start when looking for funding? How do they get there?
Build a great team around yourself, especially at the earliest stage. That's the number one thing that matters. It's the number one thing all investors look at. Great team, great talent, it attracts interest. You'll have to do less of a job of going out there and finding it, and people will find you.
Okay, so build a great team, people will find you. What about you from a buying perspective?
Yeah, I think, well, I was going to talk about just from both sides, but I think it's just be persistent and believe in what you're doing. You're going to get a lot of no's, but you just have to find the right fit and have that persistence and just believe in what you're doing.
Okay, so build a great team, persistence. I think execution is very important. Christo, what about you? What are you seeing?
I think for young entrepreneurs, they should increasingly consider not only going to with the local VCs, with the local players, the regionals, but also go across Europe, because we see more cross-border investments in really early stage. So you go to Berlin, go to London, go to all the centers and talk to the guys there as well.
So despite Brexit, go to London. I had to bring that word up as a Londoner. Okay, everyone, thank you very much. And I'm sure the three gentlemen here will be available to answer questions throughout the day. Thank you.
Yeah, thank
Thank
you.
you.